Some memories stay with us forever, tucked away in corners of our minds or boxes in the attic. We grow up, move forward, but those fragments of our past remain. The things that shaped us never truly disappear. When we rediscover them, that anticipation builds, that first familiar click, that iconic startup sound. Suddenly, we are transported back, years dissolve in seconds. It's not just about playing a game, it's about reconnecting with a feeling we thought was lost in time. Dehancer is one of those tools, plugins for color grading that just makes it super easy to get a very nice looking film look. And it's actually been a tool that I've been using on and off for I think more than 2 years now. They originally reached out to me and asked if I wanted to test it out, no strings attached. And I've been making a few videos here and there, but it's been a while since I've looked at it again because, to be honest, film looks are not what I do most, but that's also why something like Dehancer is really effective for me. And before we get any further, Dehancer is not sponsoring this video by any means, they're not paying me anything, but if by the end of this video you are interested in Dehancer, there is a link in the description and a little discount code that will get you, I think, 10% off. And I also get a little bit of a kickback if you use that discount code. So that's just to tell you, I will give you my honest opinion on this tool, this plugin, and there's nothing paid, no money exchanging hands. But if you do decide that it's for you, then of course I would appreciate if you use my link and my discount code. But that said, there are 2 use cases where I use Dehancer most often. We're mainly going to look at one of them today, and that is when I want to create or get that film look. But I'll also say that Dehancer is one of those tools that if you are not that good at color grading or you haven't been doing that for that long, it's something that can get you very far with very few steps. And I think it's pretty easy to understand when you use the sliders compared to using DaVinci Resolve's native color grading. That can be a little bit more confusing. That said, I am going to use some of the native color grading with the plugin just because I think that gives the best result. So let's dive into DaVinci Resolve and have a look at how I graded that intro sequence. And just before we do that, if you like that sequence, if you want to create something like that yourself, I have a course called Mundane Filmmaking. You can check it out in the description below, where I teach you exactly how that works. Making simple videos about ordinary, mundane things. And this was like 5 or 6 different shots that I came up with in about 20 minutes, scripted it and just planned it out. I used AI to help me make the voiceover based on what I wanted to tell. And then I filmed it and color graded it pretty fast with Dehancer as well. So that's just something I wanted to mention as well. Now let's jump into DaVinci Resolve and Dehancer. So let's say that this around here is our hero frame. That's what I started with when I graded the clip originally, and it's just to have a baseline somewhere. So there's a few things that I want to do, and if you're new to DaVinci Resolve, just take it slow and pause and see what I'm doing, and I will explain along the way why I'm doing the things that I'm doing as well. You can't do everything in the Dehancer tool itself, but I just find that these steps make it easier to adjust things along the way. So first of all, I'm going to make a couple of notes here. So we're going to make, I think, 5 notes. The first one is going to be my exposure. Second one is going to be my balance. Then I'm going to have saturation. Then I'm going to have contrast, and then I'm going to have my CST. This is where I convert from S-Log3 that I shot in to Rec 709. Now, this is going to be our baseline, so what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to tweak these a little bit because I use the HDR wheels, so I need to change that to the correct settings. You can't see what I'm doing, but I'm changing color space on the gamma to S-Log3, S-Gamma3, that's cine. Then in the balance, I am going to choose gamma and is it color space, HSV, and then I am going to disable channel 1 and channel 3. That allows us to use the gain here to just balance out the image exactly how we want with the colors. We'll get to that in a second. Saturation, I am not going to do anything with right now. Contrast, not either. And then the CST here, I am just going to add a color space transform. And in here, we are going to change it from S-Log3 to Rec 79 Gamma 2.4 because that's what my camera is set up to. So now that we have this baseline, I'm just going to take this and copy it across all of my clips. Now I have this baseline on all of them. Now we're going to add the Dehancer tool. So now we're looking at a Rec 709 image, and how I want to do this is I want the exact same LUT or look or whatever you want to call it that Dehancer produces on all of the clips. I'm just going to turn off my render cache here so we don't have those weird numbers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all my clips here, highlight them. I just click on the first one, hold shift, and then click on the last one. Then I have them all marked, right click on it. Then I'm going to say groups, or I can say add into new group. I already made a group, but we can just make it intro 2. Now they are all linked in the same group. So that means if we go into our lightbox, it's called, and we look at group here, intro, that was the one I used before, nothing in there, intro 2, now they're all grouped together. That's going to make sense in a second, because now that they're all grouped together, we will have a few more dots up here. Normally you have clip and you have timeline, but now we have group post clip and group pre-clip. You don't have to know the details of this, but it basically just means that all of these are grouped. So this is what happens before our clip grading. So the individual clip when we're grading that. This is what happens only on that specific clip. And this is what happens in the group after that clip. And then we have timeline. But timeline makes it so that you are adjusting everything in the whole timeline. And that's not necessarily what we want, because if we add anything else, adjustment layers or other things to it, assets, that will also be color graded. That's not ideal. So group post clip, here we are going to call that one Dehancer. And I'm going to go into effects here and just search for Dehancer. And I'm not even sure I'm on the latest version, but this is the version that I've been using. And as you can see, immediately things changes. So what we're going to do first here is I want to develop the look. So I'm going to find my hero frame here, something like this. And because we've already converted it to Rec 79, we don't have to do anything with the source up here. You could just change these things to be S-Log free or whatever other log profile you're shooting with, if you're shooting in log. And that can also work. I did a test of that before I did anything else. It just doesn't work as well as when you start from Rec 79. So that's why we converted everything first. And now we're just applying it directly on top of the Rec 79. It seems like that's when the plugin works best, at least for me. Then we already have some settings applied, and that's just the default of what Dehancer does. So I think the profile is the last one you've chosen. I like to use the Kodak Vision 3 250D. That is simply because that is one of the actual film stocks that they use when they are recording Hollywood films, when they are actually using film. So I like this one, but they have so many different ones that you could choose from, and they will all change up the look and how everything is. So I recommend finding one that you like, testing around, playing around with that one first, get familiar with Dehancer if you're going to use this plugin, and then go from there. You can change a lot of things up, and you can always tweak things later, but start simple. That's what I would recommend doing. So now we have our film stock emulated here, or profile. Then there's some different settings we can go into. I don't know what all of them are. I'm not a complete expert in this, so film developer is not something I usually use. Film compression I like, because that kind of dials down the highlights a little bit, crushes them a little bit, and it just makes it look more like it was shot on film and not digital. So you can see if we turn this on, you can kind of see how the background or the ceiling in this case kind of fades a little bit. And if you look at the waveform down here, you'll also be able to see that that just drops a little bit. And that's just something that you'll often see in film, especially if you know film photography, that I've never done, but seeing the characteristic from that, you'll see that the highlights are usually softer because film can capture more information. So as long as it's not clipped, I think this works pretty well. So I like to add the film compression. Sometimes I will tweak the impact, the white point, and all those things. But for the most part, I like how it looks just now. So from here, the expand is already on. Sometimes I like to play around with the print. And this is where I would usually go with the Kodak 2383. I just think it looks a little bit too much in this case. So we could drop down the contrast and it can probably look fine. But I actually found for this example here, this just added more complexity that I didn't necessarily want to work with. So I actually just liked to not have that on, and I like the look of how it just was. By the way, if you find that your exposure is off, your color balance, temperature and tint are off, you can change all of those up here. But I find that it just works a little bit better for me if I do it in the tools that I have in DaVinci Resolve. So that's why I decided not to do it in here. I also find that it's more difficult to actually balance things out between different clips when I'm using all the tools in here, in contrast to using nodes that I'm used to. But if you're not using that, if you just want to use the plugin, that's also an option to go with. So that's why I just wanted to tell you that. Then we have a lot of different things here. Color head is something that I sometimes like to tweak a little bit if you enable that. We pull up our scopes here. The vector scope here, you can see where the colors are lying. So we have red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow. So those are the colors that the image is now representing. And you can see this blob here that represents everything that we have in the image. So you can kind of see it's pulled a little bit to the yellow side now, yellow-green side, and a little bit up towards the red as well. But it's not so much lying in these other areas here. And that makes perfect sense. We don't really see that many cool tones, but we see some yellow in the skin here and green in the t-shirt. So I guess that makes sense. So what you can do in here, if you have the color head enabled, is you can actually pull these around very similarly to how you would do it in, for example, the gain. When you pull the blue, the green, and the red in different positions, here you just have them like yellow-blue. So you can see it's between the yellow and the blue axis here. You can do red and cyan. So that will be this way down here. And you can do magenta and green, that would be over here. Sorry, red and cyan would be this way. So those are just how you can kind of tweak things around a little bit if you wanted it to be different. I think we can pull it a little bit towards the blue, but not too much. I kind of like that yellowish look that it has. I feel like that's a little bit more nostalgic, and maybe pull it a little bit more away from the magenta here, or towards the magenta, sorry. So if we turn it off and then on again, we can see that we've done. Don't necessarily like it that much to all the way to that magenta, so balanced in the middle here is probably better. Now remember, because this is in the group post clip, we are right now affecting all the clips in the timeline, all the clips in the group that we have. So you want to consider that some of the clips are not looking the same way when you do it in this way that I'm doing it now. So don't tweak these too much unless you can see that it's necessary for the whole clip. So I'm actually going to turn this off for now again, just to leave it there. Then we have film grain. And I told you in the beginning that I have two use cases for Dehancer. It is if I want the film look, but it can also be if I just want film grain, halation, bloom, or film damage to my footage. So then I will turn everything else off. I think if you go to the bottom, you can say disable all tools. That will turn everything off, and then you can just turn on the ones that you want. So I find that film grain, halation, and bloom works exceptionally well through Dehancer. So if I ever have some footage that I'm grading in the regular way that I would grade, I like to apply the grain, the halation, and the bloom if I want it from Dehancer, because it just works a little bit more organic than I find that the native effects inside of DaVinci Resolve works. I'm not sure it's worth the price of Dehancer in itself. If you're just doing it for the grain, halation, and bloom, they might have smaller packs where you can actually just get those tools. I'm not entirely sure. But for when it comes to the entire thing, I think if you like to do film looks, then it's an exceptional tool. If you just want these, you can probably get away with just using the native tools in DaVinci Resolve or other plugins that might work as well. So for film grain, I like to just zoom in a little bit here. When you just leave it on the standard that it comes with, I think 35mm or something, I think it's a little bit too much. And this is completely a subjective preference thing, but I like to bring the size down a little bit and the amount way down, because I don't necessarily like to have a lot of grain in my footage, but I do like the texture that it gives and that old school feeling that it gives as well. So we can enable and disable it. And you can see now it just brings a little bit of texture to the footage, but not as much otherwise. And I don't know if the YouTube compression has ruined this for you, but yeah, it does add a little bit at least. Then there is the halation. Now that we are making something that looks like film, I think that makes sense. You will not be able to see the halation a lot in this shot. You can see that it blooms or it gives a little bit of color in the background here. I think that's fine. I usually don't tweak this that much, but you can always go to custom and then tweak all of it exactly how you want and play around with all the sliders. If you want it simple, then just choose one of the profiles that they have here, play around with them, see which one you like the most. Same thing goes with bloom. I also like that. It just gives a little bit on the skin here. and film damage. It just gives a little bit of that film damage jitter around the footage when you're seeing it play. I don't find that it's too much, so I actually like the subtlety of it, and I think it just adds a little bit of character to the video if it's going to emulate that film look anyway. And that's pretty much it. You have some more things, film breath, gate weave, some overscan. The overscan can be fun, but I think for me it just becomes a little bit too funky. I don't know how to call it. Yeah, it's a little bit too much for me. I like to still have the digital look. You can change these things, and you can also get it to be just like the borders on the top and the bottom. The vignette sometimes can be cool to have on. I like to adjust the size a little bit, and maybe the exposure a little bit here as well. Feather in a little bit. It doesn't add that much right now, but it just gives a little bit of character as well. So that's an option too. And that is pretty much it. Then you have some monitoring tool. You can use false color to see where things are lying. You can adjust the output. So if you only wanted this whole thing to be 50% of what it actually added, you can do that as well. I like it at 100% of how we've done it right now, but in other cases, you could definitely lower the impact, especially if you used one of those film prints where it looks like it's maybe a little bit too much. That's definitely the option. Then you have quality. Then you have high, that will slow it down, and you have normal fast. If you're trying to play it back, I recommend being on normal fast. Depending on your computer, it might be difficult for it to play back. On my computer, it's definitely choppy. You can try and see if we turn all audio off. You can see that it does play, but it's definitely playing a bit slower than if it was rendered. So what you can do, if that's the case, is you can go up to playback here. You can't see that I'm clicking on playback, but it's in the top here. And you can go to render cache and you can use smart. If you do that, it will automatically, especially if you're in the timeline here, see it comes with like red bar up here. Everything that's blue means that it's pre-rendered. So unless you make a change to it, it will be rendered and then it will play out smoothly. So it does take some more resources, but it also makes it so that you can see what you're actually doing. I turned it off again now because for right now, I don't need it to take that extra cache from my computer. So that said, I think I'm pretty happy with how the overall look looks on this clip, and we can browse through different ones, and there's definitely some of them that needs a little bit of tweaking, but overall, I'm pretty happy. If we turn it on and off, we can kind of see what's happening, and it doesn't necessarily look good of all of them, but that's where the individual adjustments come in. So if we go back to our first clip here, and we can go into the clip level, then we have, if you've seen any of my other color grading videos, some of the most recent ones, you will see that this node tree is almost the same as what I normally grade with. So this is just, for me, the easiest way to then grade. So if we pull up both the scopes again here, pull them up a little bit bigger here, and then I still have my nodes here. So for this, I definitely want to increase the exposure a little bit. So I'm just going to pull it up a little bit here, turn that off, turn that on again. I think that just brings a little bit more balance to the image now. The balance I'm pretty happy with. If we choose the qualifier and have display qualifier focus on here, when we're hovering around, we will be able to see this little circle that will give us an indication of where the colors lie or where the exposure lies. So for my forehead here, we can see that it lies between 60 and 70. A general rule of thumb is that good exposure on the brightest part of the skin is around 70. Since we have use the film compression, it might lie a little bit lower, and I actually think it looks good now, so I don't want to change anything more. For the colors here, we can see it lies a little bit towards the more yellow side than this skin tone line. I personally don't mind that. My skin tone is naturally a little bit more yellow, so for me that's okay. But if you wanted to change it with the settings that we changed here in the color space to HSV, turned off channel 1 and 3, that's me making a mistake here. I apologize for that. That is supposed to be for the saturation. So that's why we are only changing the saturation of things. So let's go in here instead. HSV, sorry, it's been a while since I've used these techniques. I normally just have it preset. In the balance, what we want to do is we want to go to gamma and linear, and then we want to change the lumix to 0. That is what we want to do on this level here. And that should allow us to, now we can move the colors around. So now you can see the blob up here is moving accordingly to what we are doing down here. So that is now a way where we can adjust the colors a little bit here. So let's just adjust it a tiny bit, see where we want it. I'm actually pretty happy with it, but I feel like it is a little bit too red. So I'm just gonna move it down a little bit, and that just helped remove a little bit of that red, maybe a little bit back. I think that's good. Saturation, now that we have things set up correctly, we can just increase the gain here a little bit, bring back a little bit of color. It'll mostly just give a little bit of density because of the Dehancer that we have on. And then in contrast, what I like to do is go in here, have editable splines on, and then just click in the corners and just adjust that a little bit. So maybe bring the highlights up a little bit and then bring the shadows down a little bit as well. Something like that, just splits it a little bit more. Now it's a little bit closer to 70 as well. I think that looks good. You could opt to not do that change as well. So if we now copy that across to some of the other clips, I think that pretty much balances it out. So it looks pretty similar to this one. Those were also shot in the same room with the same lighting, so that makes sense. If you copy it to this one is definitely a bit too blue, might also be a bit too bright. So I'm just going to turn the exposure off here. The balance, I'm going to go in here and just increase a little bit up here. So it looks a little bit more white in the room here from this bluish color, and then see when we move further, when I come into the frame, that also looks pretty good, I think. The contrast I'm happy with, and the saturation I'm also happy with. So this is kind of the fast way to go through that. Every time I go to a new one, I just click Command V to paste in the settings from the first clip, and then I will adjust them from there. I think it's good with the exposure here, and I use Command D to turn them on and off to see what works and what doesn't. Here it's definitely too blue, too cool, so we're gonna turn that up a little bit, not too much. Something like that, I think looks good. See when my arm comes into the frame, I think that looks good. Saturation is good too, and the contrast is pretty good as well. Next clip here, copy paste it in here. I think the exposure adjustment definitely does something for it here. I think it is good to get a little bit cooler here, but maybe a little bit more towards the yellow, something like this. Now we can change or check where this is lying. This is pretty much lying on the line, but a bit more to the yellow. So now this is too much down, so we can kind of use that as a reference, like the things that we can see in multiple shots to look similar. So I'm going for the couch here to try and get that to look somewhat the same as what it did before. So I'm just adjusting the gain here to get to that. I think that looks good. Saturation is good, and the contrast is pretty good as well. Then we come to this clip. If we paste it in here, we can see that is way too dark and off in a lot of different areas. The exposure is fine, but what we definitely want to do is I like to go into the primaries here and then just take my shadows and then just crank that up quite a bit here for this shot, maybe around 50, because it was quite dark, and I think that just gives us enough exposure that the clip looks pretty good. Then the balance is definitely off here, so we need to take the gain and just increase that a little bit here. I'm looking for the couch here to land just around the center of the yellow line here, something like that. I think it's pretty good. And then it looks a little bit too green, so I'm just going to move it a little bit more over and up here. Sometimes I like to use the red, green, and blue down here. Sometimes I like to just move the dot. It depends a little bit on how small of adjustments I want to make. So I think this looks pretty good as well. It is a darker scene. It was difficult to expose for the outside and then also get some light on me. So that's okay for this one. And then for the last one, if we add this in here, we definitely turn the exposure adjustments here off. But then I think we want to take the highlights here and just bring those down a little bit, something like this, and then maybe bring the shadows up a little bit as well, just to like 15. I think that looks pretty good. And then again, the balance is definitely off here, so if we just reset that, I think we can definitely bring it up a little bit here and a little bit to the left, just trying to get something that looks pretty good. Saturation looks pretty good, and I'm pretty happy with contrast. And that was basically it. So, having a look at Dehancer, this is what it would look like with all the adjustments that we just made if we didn't have the Dehancer on, and this is what it looks like with it on. Again, there's so many different profiles you can play around with. There's a lot more in depth that you can go with all of the different tools in here, but because it's with sliders, I find that at least the adjustments that are about the film look itself works really well to adjust, and the things that are more about exposure and balance and saturation, you can definitely work with them in there. And you can also do it on an individual clip level, but to get the same aesthetic throughout the entire scene, I find personally that this is the easiest way for me. I'm pretty trained in doing color grading now, so that might be different from you. So I just encourage you, if you think that this tool is for you, or if you have it already, that this is something that you should play around with. It takes some time to get used to, just like with anything else. So don't get discouraged if it doesn't look amazing from the beginning. But I do think you can get very far, very fast with this tool if you just apply the profiles and do some basic adjustments to begin with. So as with anything else in video, lighting, exposure, and focus are the most important things in how you filmed it. And as long as you've filmed it in a way that is possible to grade and you know what you're doing just a little bit, you can get very far. So this was by no means perfectly exposed. You can see we changed the exposure quite a bit, especially on this shot here. And I think it turned out decent at the end. Sometimes it's not the most important that it looks perfect. It just kind of needs to blend in and make sense in the video. And I think I achieved that, at least to a certain extent here. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful in one way or another. At least for me, it's fun to take a concept like this and quickly grade it with something like Dehancer. And it took me a little bit longer now that I was talking about it to redo it again, but it honestly didn't take me that long to do it initially. So with some practice, you can definitely do it too. And with that said, I'll just catch you in the next video. And until then, take care.